So without a further ado, let's get to know our panelists.
Okay. Hello. Hi, guys. I'm Danielle. I'm from the United States. I'm a children's therapist out of Philadelphia, and I do two passion projects. One is out of Connecticut called Deep Play for Kids. We work on mindfulness and social emotional skills and implementing them into school curriculums. The other one is called Girls Soccer Worldwide, and it's out of Paraguay, and we work on equality, empowerment, and education. Hi. My name's Patty, and I'm from Australia. And we'll try and fix that up in a second. Yeah, and I'm a psychology student, and I run my own business running mental health workshops around mental health education and awareness aimed at decreasing the stigma for high school students and informing high school students of what their rights are with mental health and how to look after their mental health and be mentally well.
Yes, they told me to mute him, so.
Hello. Okay. My name is Jones Ajay, and I'm from Ghana. I'm the founding partner of a nonprofit NGO called Health Machines Alliance International, and we are stepping up to take the challenges to fight against rural health disparities in Ghana. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chido Pamela Matsika, and I'm from Zimbabwe, a junior studying accounting here at Michigan State University. And so you may wonder, what's an accountant doing talking about mental health? To answer that question, it's two things: passion and owning the fact that I am tomorrow's leader. And with that said, we start today in the steps to make tomorrow great. And with that, I'm working with my Ministry of Secondary and Primary Education to raise awareness on mental health. And I hope that today you may give us your attention with the rest of the panel in hearing what we have to say, and hopefully we can plant a couple of seeds that you may go back and grow. Thank you.
We're just waiting on Sean to introduce himself and his team. They are the group that are joining us remotely.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
What's going on?
Hello? Yes, you can hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, hi, good morning. So my name is Sean Melville. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm here with Marlon Pereiro.
Hi everyone, I'm Marlon Pereiro.
And Ashnat McEwen.
Hi everyone, I am Asanath McEwen and I'm into business development and marketing. I have been an advocate for persons with disabilities for over 10 years and I'm happy to be here with you.
So we make up Ipsum Technologies. We are a social enterprise that focuses on more or less advocating for the digital inclusion of persons with disabilities. And today we are here to present on the topic of mental health and some of the challenges that youth with disabilities have in more or less engaging in society. So we look forward to sharing our perspective with you guys as well as to learn from your discussion.
All right, so let's get our discussion started. And I have the first question here. Based on your experiences, how do young people define well-being? What aspects of well-being do they consider the most important?
Hello. Now it's working. I think for an Australian context, a lot of the young people I'm surrounded with, especially high school students and university students, really look at well-being and defining that as quite holistic. They look at their spirituality, they look at their mental health and a major part of that is their stress level. So not necessarily having a mental health disorder as that defining if they're mentally unwell, but actually looking at other factors such as if they're really stressed or if they don't have great coping mechanisms is a way that now I'm seeing a lot more young people define their mental health.
No, she's there.
I think young people also define well-being as an experience of like happiness, happiness or like prosperity as well. And then it embodies like well-being also embodies other characters or other factors like social well-being, physical well-being and stuff. But if you look at now answering the second question, if you look at one of the single most important aspect of well-being, I think I'll go in for the health. Now, when you look at health, I'll go in for physical well-being as one of the most important aspect of like well-being, because there's a connection between the body and then the mind. Whatever you feed into the body will go on to also affect the mind. Now, let's look at this example. If you look at physical activity like maybe having an exercise or performing any other physical activities. Now, what happens is when you perform any of these physical activities, it tends to elicit some like chemicals or some substances that will kind of bring an exposure like good mood. So a good physical activity will elicit like good mood, and then good mood will also, or is also having a connection with emotional and other activities. So I will consider physical well-being as one of the single most important factor whenever we talk about well-being.
My interaction with the youth back home in my community in Zimbabwe is when you ask them what well-being is, the key word that comes out is stress-free. And they use a term that we youth use, which is good vibes. So it's just not having to stress about, especially the economic situation, and being able to go to a facility or having resources in terms of if you're going through something and knowing that there's a place that you can go to and a place where you can get help. So that's what they define as really being like well-being, is getting the help and knowing that there's somebody you can talk to.
From my culture as well, I find that oftentimes a goal in well-being or something that we're trying to obtain is happiness. And I think that's what I guess their perspective is on well-being. It's solely focusing on happiness and not necessarily what else is going on in your mind and how we can relieve those ways. I know oftentimes it is focused on stress relieving as well. So definitely.
Sean, do you have any comments on your team?
Okay, yes. So I can comment from the perspective of knowing what a lot of the youth tend to focus on. Sometimes they look towards music and parties as a way of relieving stress, and that may not necessarily be the best incentive or best thing for them to do in order to maintain a proper mental health. And so I think it's primarily focused on short-term gains in terms of happiness rather than what are some of these activities or some of these stress relieving things that they get involved with what is the long-term implications for their mental health. So that's my perspective from Trinidad.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm really glad that the stress-free was brought up, the holistic, taking care of your whole self, spiritually, physically, mentally. All that is a big component on health and well-being. But according to the research, 20% of young adults have struggled with mental health conditions. And as a result, suicide is the third leading cause of death among this group of people. So I'm wondering what key factors contributing to the growing mental health issues that young adults are facing today, and do these factors differ across countries and regions?
So I would say
What are the factors?
now one of the factors that contributes to mental illness amount, like these young adults, will include like cultural trends. So we realize that over the past 10 years, there have been changes in cultural differences. Now, the mood in which young adults use social media or other social vices is different from when you look at way back like 10 years or so. So you realize that more young adults spend a lot of time on social media. And then one of it is when they spend more time on social media, like they don't also have enough sleep. That is also another factor. And then there's a connection between when not having enough sleep and then predisposing one to mental illness. Now, when we go to social media, now let's look at some of these things that happens on social media. Now you get people posting good things on social media, and then when a young adult has access to social media and then see these positive or successful things being posted by his or a friend, this tends to skew the person away from his or her mood. And then the next thing is it predisposes the person to like depression or maybe anxiety, and all these are some of the complex factors that can lead one to mental illness. Then another thing that I also talk about when like in terms of mental illness is when the person is not having access to, or the person is having all these chronic functions that I talked about. This can now elicit some of the mood, like as I already made mention of, like the anxiety, the depression and stuff. So this is one of the factors that I believe is able to contribute to mental illness.
Two key factors that I have found is one, like you mentioned, the social media, which I believe is self-comparison. I think that's a thief of contentment and a catalyst for negative mental health is comparing, whether it's via social media or to each other, even here at the conference, constantly comparing. And the second key factor, I believe, is the lack of connection and the lack of communication about mental health. There was an interesting technology panel discussion this morning which talked about all the advances that we are making. But so horizontally, we're doing great technologically wise, but the depth of our conversation is lacking more than ever. The depth of the connection, of the human connection. So.
I would like to just highlight what you just mentioned on the lack of resources and the lack of an environment or a society that allows for somebody to seek help. It's actually really sad when you compare, especially I grew up in Zimbabwe and I came over to the US to study, and MSU has done such a great job in making sure that resources are available if you're going through anything, and going back home and comparing and to see whether that is available, it's not available. And the lack of that is what then worsens the situation. And just how the conversations about mental health in Zimbabwe, and I'd like to think other African countries, is very taboo. The link between mental health and a mental institution is very instant, which is not the case. And that then puts people in a box and not want to speak out. So I think lack of a very conducive environment is what worsens the situation.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with what these three have said, and I think it varies across cultures and across countries, but there's definitely a few kind of core reasons that it's increasing globally. Definitely the social media aspect, but also, if you look at the world events currently, so our generation, so Gen Z and the millennials have grown up in a world, of technology. Our world is closer and more connected than it ever has been before, which is quite a beautiful thing, but it's also quite a difficult thing because we've grown up in a time that's taught us that the world isn't safe. So for a lot of us, we might not actually remember where we were during 9/11. I suppose if you ask that question to older generations, they know exactly where they were because it was such a pinnacle in global history. The impact that that's had on us is during our self-actualization period. So that's the point where we all kind of in our brains and in our lives realize we're a part of a bigger world. So during our self-actualization period, we were exposed to terrorism and really big threats. So we've grown up knowing that the world is quite unsafe, quite dangerous. And so I think this has definitely contributed to higher rates of mental illness. Also too, when we turn on the TV now, we know our world's dying. We know there's all these issues we have to fix, and a lot of that's falling on young people's shoulders, and they're really carrying the burden of that, which is impacting their mental health. And also, as Danny said, with social media, we're lacking real connection. So we're really connected, more connected than ever before, but we're not facilitating spaces where we can have really open and honest conversations. We know we're meant to ask our friends how they are, but we don't actually know how to respond if they say they're not good, or we're really good at laughing and joking it off and not really interacting on that deeper level and holding space for when people are in quite deep pain.
So we all know that depending on the culture, religious background, and education level, sometimes that can impact our understanding of wellness or mental health and the type of service that we seek out. So I'm kind of curious in regard to the barriers, the cultural or structural barriers that you face when you do in your work, and what strategies or resources that you have found most effective in addressing those challenges.
I think one of the biggest barriers is definitely stigma. There's so much stigma associated to mental health globally, wherever you look, and it's impacting people from accessing services, especially within Australia. We have quite a big wealth of resources, but the stigma associated to actually going and seeking help is quite big. So I think we need to really look at the stigma and where this is kind of stemming from, because, as we've heard and as we've seen, when you think about mental health, you think about psychiatric institutions, which most definitely isn't the case.
Sean, do you want to speak about stigma? I know that we had some conversations in regard to marginalized community and people with disabilities, like people with disabilities, women, and certain rural areas, and how this impacts their ability to receive services.
In terms of stigma, where persons with disabilities are concerned, it is a very touching issue, especially as a person with a disability, because for me, as you walk into an environment, the first thing somebody would see is your disability rather than your ability. So for example, if I have to go to an interview, and as a person with a disability coming into the interview, everybody else may be given a fair chance. But however, for me, as a person with a disability, I have to start from zero, whereas most persons would start from 100. And as they go through the interview, then the numbers drop. And I have to start from zero and work harder to build my numbers to get it up to 100. So the stigmatization is there. I use employment or an interview as an example, but it's right wrong. Even if let's say you have to use public transportation, people assume that you do not know where you're going. As a person, I'm visually impaired, so they assume that you do not know where you're going because another person without a disability gets into the same public transportation, and the question about do you know where you're going would not be asked by those persons. So it's stigmatization and persons' negative attitude towards persons with disabilities. And that could definitely impact the person's mental health and happiness, because when you go out on the street, it makes you uncomfortable as a person with a disability, and you have to be facing that stigmatization on a regular basis, on a daily basis.
Yes, definitely, that is true. Individuals with disabilities face a lot of challenges regardless of where in the world we are. And of course, if we are in rural areas, it makes things a lot more challenging. But I'm wondering what is being done currently or could be done to close the inequality gap?
Okay, all right. What could be done? Okay, so you want to answer?
Yeah,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
can start. I think awareness is the number one way to solve this problem. Because in Trinidad and Tobago, I am involved heavily in a number of sensitization training. And normally when I start off my training and I get feedback from persons who are in the room who normally do not have a disability, I can tell that the individuals just do not know. And at the end of the training, they normally leave the training with a different mindset. And starting from awareness could definitely reduce the stigmatization, the attitudes, the barriers between persons with disabilities and persons without disabilities, and therefore bring about a level of comfort for persons with disabilities when interacting with members of society.
I just want to add to that in that if you are able to educate persons within, let's say, the same environment, so you don't have special schools for persons with disabilities and persons who don't, then you increase the level of tolerance, which could eventually lead to a change in the mindset in terms of how you view persons with disabilities. So I was fortunate growing up to have had several colleagues who were hearing impaired, and they gave me an idea as to what it was like to deal with persons who had disabilities. So based upon my experience, I was able to develop empathy. So that was one instance. My grandmother also had glaucoma, so she eventually lost her sight. And it's just going through some of these experiences, being able to interact with people who have different disabilities, builds a level of understanding which I don't think you would get if you have separate schools for persons who have disabilities and persons who don't. So that's just my input there. Marlon, you want to add anything? Yeah.
Hi. So as it relates to having a disability, stigmatization is in fact an issue, echoing my colleagues to my right. I am totally blind, and I am fortunate to have kept my job simply because of advocacy and showing persons that with training I can do just as well as they are. I can't say that other persons would have that same, opportunity. What has to happen is that within teaching persons who do not have disabilities how to interact and how to be empathetic rather than sympathetic towards persons with disabilities. You have to always try not to make persons feel uncomfortable, because what happens is that you could go to the other side of the spectrum where the persons feel so bad that they decide to just leave it out altogether. So what I basically do, what we try to do is that within our training, we have a lot of humor involved in it. Let's just let people laugh, just laugh at yourself and just try to do better. I mean, in Trinidad, there are some places it's really, really bad, because there were times I bent down to tie my shoelaces and people started to applaud. So you have to. I mean, tying a shoelace is something that's so trivial. It's not something to be thinking about. But persons in Trinidad sometimes tend to believe that because you have a disability, you can't do anything at all. And I'm talking about from brushing your teeth to having children. So this is where.
Thank you so much, Marlon.
Right,
We
so we
really appreciate you sharing this, and it's really important. Just for the sake of time, I hate to cut you off, but we really do have 5 minutes, and really we would like to answer some questions from our audience. But we really do appreciate mental health is not something that can be addressed in 45 minutes. So it's a really big thing. And in the future, hopefully, maybe we can rearrange that. But in the meantime, I really want to open it up to our audience and see if anybody has questions that our panelists can, yes.
Your voice. Huh? Your voice.
Thank you. I am Jogo from Zambia. My question is, what is your comment on the stigma that comes with sleep? Generally, we understand people that get more sleep to be weaker, both in the academic setting as well as out there. Also, I could also need your take on how would students and professionals alike balance the trade-off of getting adequate sleep as well as being able to meet their obligations socially, academically, and in all other sectors. Thank you.
To anybody in the panel? But I didn't quite understand the question.
Yeah, I think we've definitely built up a culture where if you're successful and if you work hard, you're working yourself into the ground and you're not sleeping, which is a pretty unhealthy culture, and I think one that we probably have all fallen victim to. So I think it's reframing how we actually picture success and picture hard work, because you don't have to work ourselves into the ground to be successful or be working hard. And I think too, for your second point, it's a matter of not only balancing our time, but our energy. We can be getting all the sleep in the world, or we could actually be getting, say 5 hours sleep, but functioning quite well if we're really looking after our bodies, if we're eating well, if we're taking time out that we need, or if we're just chatting with a friend to really replenish ourselves so we've got the energy to keep going. So I think it's not just looking at how we manage our time and getting enough sleep, because getting enough sleep is super duper important, don't get me wrong, but I think we all know when you come to an event like this, you're working really hard, you're probably not sleeping as much. It's finding other ways to really look after yourself and your body, especially as students, as leaders. What else are the things we can do to look after our time and our energy?
And by the way, I misspoke. We actually have 15 minutes, so we can take more questions. I thought we were done at 12:15.
So the whole purpose of this summit is to challenge the assumption that adults are the repository of knowledge and turn the tables over to you. So my question is, what do you have to say to us as parents and teachers and adults in the world about mental health? What should we be doing that we're not doing? And what should we be thinking about to help solve this problem?
So I will, my mom actually asked me a question when I was just telling her about my trip here and so forth. And I told her that let's start by saying that when I'm saying I'm having a panic attack, when I say I'm overwhelmed, let's not say, oh, I don't know what that is. Get over it. We don't know what that is. Let's change our mindset. Sit me down and then talk to me and say, what is wrong? Let me explain what is going on, but don't assume that I'm being childish or I'm just stressing over something minor. So I think as parents, as friends as well, as teachers, as just normal human being as we are, it's just to listen and to notice things that are happening to your children, things that are happening to your friend, and to not be so quick to say, oh, no, that's nothing. But yeah, I would say to listen, especially to our children as parents in this room, is to listen to the children, because the youth are going through a phase where we're losing so many youth. Depression is a real topic, and I'm speaking from back home. It's a real topic where I have lost my peers to that. So parents, please listen. When we come to you, it's not that we're being childish, but something is really wrong.
Also to add to this, I also made mention that one of the contributing factors of mental health is like having or not having this, like having a bad attitude in terms of using social media. So in order to help monitor this, I also believe it's a responsibility of parents, especially to help monitor the health behavior of their wards, especially in how to use social media. because they should monitor some of the aspect of social media that students normally go into. And then when they monitor some of these social media platforms that students or their words go into, these students or these words will not be able to, get themselves into other things that may lead or like into depression and other like anxiety and stuff. So I believe it's one of the responsibility of parents to monitor the health behavior of their words in terms of using social media.
Hi, Ikram, can I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. So I have 2 points to make on that topic. The first point has to do with having open conversations, because I think that if it is we have conversations with whether it's with our adult parents or our children, according to where we are in the life cycle, we can share our experiences, and I think that leads to help, whether it's youth or young adults, learn from the older generation how to deal with certain issues. Because I think because of how our education system has been structured, we spend a lot of time away from our caregivers and more with teachers or other persons who don't necessarily have that emotional connection to us. And so we aren't really able to bond with the primary caregivers who brought us into this world. So having more conversations and more sincere ones, open conversations, will help address some of the mental health issues and help to build coping mechanisms or coping skills. The second thing that I think needs to happen is that youth also need to develop a level of mental toughness. The world itself is a very challenging place to live in, and it's not going to get any easier because we would like it to be that way. So we have to learn how to deal with issues when they arise. And I think a lot of times people tend to get sheltered in some places, as well as some people may not necessarily get the support. So there's two extremes to the whole situation. And so I think there needs to be a level of support where that is concerned to help people understand that sometimes life is not going to go the way they want it to, and you're just going to have to deal with them as those situations as they arise.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that was a really important question, because sometimes it seems like parents and children are speaking two different languages when it comes to mental health. So how could we close that gap and have vocabulary that we all understand and very common language?
I guess this is kind of related to what he just answered, but earlier you were talking about getting rid of stress to happiness. Recently I've kind of noticed that among young people, the idea of any type of stress is bad. Like, we should avoid it at all costs. Do you think that's true? Or like, is there, because where's the line between where we can build resilience to like get through that stuff and when we should take it seriously and like, okay, I can't handle this on my own?
Yeah, I think that's a truly great question. To give you an example, I think like this conference was pretty stressful for, I'm sure for all of us in this room. So to give you an example, it comes to the point of where it's stressful enough to motivate us to want to do better, to want to perform to our very best, or when it's too much to when it's hindering us, to when we're not sleeping or we're having this negative psychological discord towards ourselves. So I think that is to the point of when, like, take a deep breath. Like, I'm up here constantly taking deep breaths because of the stress levels.
Stress and excitement are actually the exact same like neurological pathway, and it's the same physiological response. So I think it's a matter of like how we respond and how we cope with it, because like you said, stress is quite inevitable. It's part of life. But I think it's when we get to a point where stresses are quite intense, or when we actually can't handle the stress that are happening in our lives. So finding coping mechanisms around that, but also not viewing stress as a bad thing because it's an inevitable part of life.
I'm Jalika from Burkina Faso. My main concern is regarding drug addiction. So this is an increase, phenomenon in my country. So in general, this lead to, mental health issues like anxiety, depression, bipolar, like disorder, something like that. So when this happens, is that reversible? One question. And then how could you give us some tips or strategy to prevent our children to get into drugs addiction? Thank you.
I think to answer the last one on how to prevent, the world is the scary place. It's got bad people. That's a fact. And I think as a parent, it's just to monitor your child. And as they grow up, I think it was mentioned that you shouldn't overshield, because that's one thing that happens, that parents overshield us. And when we then go out into the world, it's a shock because we've been so shielded. But I think as you raise your kids, is to just lay it as it is, have open conversations, and make yourself approachable. I'll be honest, there's some parents who are not approachable, where you know that I cannot talk about this with my mom or my dad, and that fear is what then leads some youth to go out and start on drugs, because that's what they can relate to, because their parents are not that open. So it's just having a very open conversation with your children. Talk about everything, because home is that's where your trust is built. So if you don't have those conversations at home, there's no other place that you'll have those conversations.
Hello. Hi. I'm Samuel from Haiti. My question for you guys would be, what advices could you give us? Like, we are all gathered here, a lot of brilliant people working overtime and under tremendous pressure. What would you tell us? How could we leave work as perfectly as we can while having a stable or like mental health status? So.
Okay, don't understand the question.
What is that?
I don't understand.
Can I repeat the question? He asked, what advice would you give us as young people in regard to managing stress? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Mhm.
Nobody answered.
So it's more about balance. How do we balance all the pressures and things that we have to do? And because we feel we're superhumans, we need to take care of everything and we can do it. But then it affects our mental health and mental wellness. And then also it affects our decision making and judgment.
I think I'll use this as an example, like when I was a student, and then I'll make this connection to your question. So I'll take it like, for instance, when I was a student, I was having a lot of activities to perform. For example, like you have assignments, you have to teach, you have to work on campus, and then also meeting like the financial payments of the school, as well as other activities. So you realize that, and then you also have to deal with how to make connection with friends and also accommodate all these activities on campus. So like combining all this is difficult, for example, like among young adults. So I believe one of the things that I was able to do that helped me a lot was prioritization. I have to prioritize all these activities. When you combine and you want to do all these activities at a particular time, you realize that you become so stressed. Like it is where the depression starts to, come in. So if you prioritize, you can do certain things and then like just ignore, just prioritize and prioritize them based on relevance. So that is how I'll answer this question.
I think it's also important to start your own daily practice, regardless to if it's 2 minutes to a half hour, to actually taking that time, whether in the morning or in the afternoon, to really put yourself first and really start to build that practice. It doesn't necessarily have to be